Rent-to-own can be one of the best ways to get into a house. It can help you lock in a price and start building equity, especially if you're not in a financial or credit position to use a traditional mortgage. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how rent-to-own works. I'm going to walk you through the different types of rent-to-own because they're not all created equal. Towards the end of the video, I'm going to talk about who rent-to-own is good for. So you're going to want to make sure that you stay tuned for this portion because there's a couple of considerations that not everyone takes into account. So let's jump into it. So the first things first, let's go over how rent-to-own works and how to convert the contract into officially being your house. Let's first cover the basics. What is a rent-to-own? So a rent-to-own is effectively you and a seller entering into a contract that says that you will rent the house and you will make X amount of payments for X number of months. And at the end of that period, they will give you the option to buy the home. Or you will buy the home at the end of that period for a certain price. It's literally that simple. You will pay them rent for, let's say, 2 years. And then at the end of the 2-year period, you can buy the house from them for, let's say, $250,000. So as I said a second ago, there are a couple of different ways to do this. It is very important that you understand the differences because they are massively different. And if you don't understand what you're getting yourself into, you could actually be in some legal trouble. So the first option is called a lease option. And what a lease option is, it's kind of like a standard rental agreement. You rent the home from the seller, and at the end of that period, you have the option to buy, meaning that you're not required to buy the home. But if you choose not to buy the home, then at the end of the option period, any payments that you made along the way would just be rental payments, like you were renting the home from them. Now, any payments that you made along the way and you choose to exercise your option to buy, those payments would actually act as a down payment. Once you actually want to buy the home, a portion of your payments would come off the price of the home. Now, the second most common way is called the lease purchase or a land contract. This is very similar to the lease option. Your payments are applied as normal, but one of the main differences is during the lease purchase contract, you and the seller go to the county and you put your name on the deed. So you're an actual owner on the home, unlike the lease option. You're not an owner on the home on the lease option until the period is done. With a lease purchase, you're an owner from the beginning. Now, this can sound scary at first, but it's actually one of the safer and better ways to do rent-to-own. You're on the title of the home, meaning you're as much of the owner as the current owner. This means that the seller can't go take out any loans on the home, or if the seller passes away, the family can't just say, well, we're done. We didn't enter into this agreement with you. The thing about this option is that at the end of the term, you're going to be required to buy the home because you're an owner on the home. So if you're exercising this option, you're going to want to be very mindful and you're going to want to be talking to a lender as you go through this about your credit and your income and that you've bought a house that you can actually afford. This means that you can get traditional financing once the contract expires. So if you agreed that at the end of the 2 years, you're going to buy the home and you're going to get traditional financing, you better make sure that at the end of that 2-year period, you're going to qualify for the traditional financing. Because if you don't qualify at the end of the 2-year period, you might find yourself in court. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but generally these result in court because you're an owner on the home. The seller can't just go to the county like you guys did before and remove you without your consent. They would either have to take you to court for contractual failure, or you guys can agree to go together and remove yourself. But again, that will result in you losing any amount of money that you had put into that property. Now, this is a much more binding way to buy a rent to own because it keeps both parties accountable. And so if you're pretty certain that at the end of the 2-year period that you'll be able to afford the home, this would be one of the better and safer ways to buy the house. Now, let's jump into how to structure these deals, or how these deals are typically structured. So I'm going to be a little bit more broad here. Unlike a traditional mortgage, you don't have to meet certain guidelines to qualify. For instance, you could have a lower credit or a weird income, like if you had just quit your job last month to become a crypto bro, and I'm gonna tell you now, you're not gonna get approved for a traditional mortgage, but you might be able to convince a seller that your new coin that you just came up with is gonna kill it. So the first and the most obvious way that these deals are structured is, one, you have to find out how much you're actually gonna pay for the home. And I know this is really obvious, but let's say that you are the seller and you lease option the home to me today for a 3-year contract. Am I going to pay the home price today when we sign the contract? Or am I going to pay the price of the home 3 years from now when I actually go to buy the home? That's something that you're going to want to be very specific about, because I can almost guarantee you that 3 years from now, house prices are going to be drastically different than what they are today. You can also negotiate how much of the monthly rental payment goes towards the down payment or building the equity in the home. Now, you want to have this nailed down because, one, you want to make sure you're paying a good interest rate. And two, you want to make sure that you're actually paying down on the home so that when you go to buy the home, you have built equity into the home. Not paying down on the equity in a home is kind of defeating the purpose of rent to own. Now, just as a side note, like most contract negotiations, both parties are going to want to win. So you might find a situation where if you lock in the house price today, you might have to pay slightly higher interest rate. If you lock in the home price for 3 years from now, you might be able to negotiate a slightly lower interest rate. It's going to be up to you to do your research and to decide what you're comfortable with. But obviously, you don't want to pay a high interest rate and a high home price. So let's talk about the monthly payment. How do you decide what the monthly payment is? Some sellers might have one in mind. You could go on Zillow and pull like the Zestimate rent, or do comparable rentals in the area. Or you could use what's called the 1% rule, meaning you take 1% of the home price as your monthly rent. So on a $250,000 house, you're gonna pay about $2,500 per month in rent. Now, you also want to negotiate how much of that $2,500 goes towards paying down the rent on the rent to own or the equity of the home. It's effectively money in your pocket, so it might seem like you're paying a higher rent than what you might be able to find, on other houses. But keep in mind, part of that is effectively acting as your down payment once you go to buy the house. So for instance, you go and buy the house for $250,000. The rental payment per month is $2,500, and you negotiate that 50% of that $2,500 goes to pay down the rent to own or the land contract each month, so that you have $1,250 going towards the down payment, and you have $1,250 per month going towards the equity in the home. So over a 2-year contract, you have about $30,000. So this matters a lot for the end of the contract. So let's go over what happens at the end of the contract. Oh, and real quick, you'll also want to negotiate things like who pays for the upkeep and the maintenance. That's going to be separate, or it could be separate than the actual monthly payment. You're going to want to have that nailed down as well. So what happens at the end? Let's say that you did the lease purchase option. Remember, this is the option where you're required to buy the home at the end. Once you start talking to a lender, you'll be doing what's considered a refinance because you're already an owner on the home. One of the advantages here is that it's kind of an easier process. Because you already own the home, you don't have to come up with a down payment or prove where your money is coming from. You also might get a slightly lower interest rate because you already have equity in the house, and any of the closing costs or like prepaid taxes and insurance can be rolled into the mortgage. Unlike a purchase, you have to come out of pocket with those or have the seller to pay. If you did a lease option, meaning the one where you're not an owner on the home and you're not required to buy the property, this would be considered a purchase. This option, you might be required to sign a new purchase agreement, meaning the seller could try to renegotiate. It's kind of unscrupulous, but if they do that, you already have a contract. But for the lender's purposes, you might need an actual home purchase agreement. And because it's a purchase, not a refinance, you have to have at least 3 or 5% down. Now, the rental payments should be going towards that. Again, this is what I said earlier. You want to negotiate that to make sure that it's well documented and on paper that that was the recourse, right? That you weren't just renting the property. So it's important that you have that stuff figured out ahead of time. Now, I don't want to scare anyone. Either one of these options are completely fine and they are completely workable. You just want to make sure that you're talking to a lender ahead of time to make sure that there aren't any roadblocks that might prevent you from getting a mortgage in the future. And once you actually close on the mortgage of either one of these options, it's going to be a standard mortgage, like as if you were just buying the house outright using a traditional lender originally. Now, before we talk about who rent to own is for, remember I said there's a couple of cool considerations, so you're gonna wanna stay tuned. Let's talk about how you actually find a rental home. Like, how do you go about it? Because there could be a lot of legwork involved. So one of the most common options is to go on Zillow and look at what properties are for rent, right? What properties are for sale by owner. Now, you're kind of taking a shot in the dark with this method and you're doing a lot of legwork. You're going to have a lot of sellers or a lot of renters that are just completely not interested. You're kind of casting a wide net. But one of the advantages is that you might actually get a pretty good deal and you have full ability to negotiate the deal. The other way is through a real estate agent. Agents have a ton of contacts and they're always talking to people about what they're doing with their home. So for a small finder's fee, you could have a real estate agent that knows someone who is willing to do a land contract or a rent to own option. Again, they're not going to do it for free. You're going to have to sweeten the pot a little bit, but it could be a good way to find a good deal that's off market where people haven't been calling on it. And one of the plus sides is that the realtor can make the introduction and they can potentially help you negotiate the deal. And the final way is to use a service like Home Partners, Divvy, or Dream America. Now, I'll have resources in the description down below so that you can do your own research and decide what program is best for you. If this is the option that you want to go, I would be more than happy to discuss it further with you. Now, these service options tend to be a little more cookie cutter and very specific when it comes to their rules, but they could be great options for you if you're not really interested in keeping your ear to the ground and doing the legwork, or you don't want strict negotiations or full negotiation ability. So I'll have links in the description down below so that you can do your research and potentially contact some of the services if you're interested. Now, any one of these options that I listed should be able to give pretty much anyone a way to find a rent to own. So now you know what a rent to own is, you know how to negotiate it, you know what happens when the contract's done, and you know how to find it. But now you need to know, is it right for you? So, from the seller's perspective, a rent to own is typically a good idea for a seller that is looking to sell, but not right now. A good example of this would be, let's say I'm getting ready to retire in 3 years and I want to have a contract pre-sold. I retire and then I sell the house and it's already done. I don't have to mess around with it. You're already ready to buy it. Okay? Now, From a buyer's perspective, it typically means that the buyer isn't quite ready to meet a traditional mortgage guideline. And I don't mean that disparagingly. Maybe they don't have the down payment yet, or maybe they're trying to get their credit up to 580, which is typically required for a mortgage, or maybe they're trying to get their credit to a 700 where they could get the best interest rate. Because at a 580, you might have an extremely high interest rate or outright not qualify. Or, as I touched on earlier, there might be inconsistency in your income, let's say for restaurant staff or full commission salespeople, or maybe you started a new business. I get it. You make a ton of money with your OnlyFans or your trading crypto or your side hustle, but a lender is going to require that you have a 2-year history and that your income is considered consistent and likely to continue. And so they may request for at least 2 years, and you have to have tax returns proving your income. So rent to own buys you time. It allows you to fortify your work history, save up for the down payment, and build your credit. But it also allows you to build equity, and it allows you to lock in the price of the home. Now, 2 of the things people don't consider is that you can use a rent-to-own property as a rental property. You can start producing an income. Using traditional mortgages to buy a rental property is fine. You can put 20-30% down. You don't have to do that with a rent-to-own. You can do a rent-to-own, use it as a rental property once that contract ends, and then you can go to flip it into a traditional mortgage. You're already going to have the equity, and you never have to put that money out of your pocket. So you could effectively be double dipping. Let's say you had the 20 or 30% to put down because you were planning on getting a traditional mortgage. You could keep that money in your pocket. Do a rent to own. Rent that property out, have it instantly start producing an income, and then you could utilize your cash somewhere else, all while building equity in your rent-to-own property that you're renting out. And guys, this is actually really common. A lot of people that do rent-to-own actually use them as rentals. Obviously, you're going to want to disclose this to the seller. You're going to start building a rental portfolio this way, all the while you get to keep money in your pocket and build equity and produce an income. And the other thing is you can actually Airbnb it. Yes, it's become kind of an Instagram business model, just like drop shipping was in 2013. It's actually a usable model. Just don't think or don't believe anyone that says that you're going to get rich off of just doing rental Airbnbs alone. Now, was this helpful? Did I miss anything? If you have any questions, comment down below. And if you got value out of this video, please hit that big red subscribe button. I'm April Courtney Dunn with April Dunn Real Estate, and I am here to make videos to help guide and educate everyday people into making solid real estate decisions. I'll see you on the next one.